Today we're talking about another topic in spirituality, which is spiritual awakening. And we will talking about what it is, stages of it, and how to navigate it. And maybe we can start with what is spiritual awakening? What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Great. Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to say that everybody's different. So what it looks like and what it feels like is very individual. However, there are definitely some common threads and some ways that we can understand what's happening, because if we don't understand and again, a spiritual awakening is just a term that we're giving to a phenomenon in evolution that is currently happening a lot on planet Earth. And with the human species, it's like an evolutionary leap. This is nothing new. We've always had different leaps. And what we're calling commonly in culture a spiritual awakening is simply this awareness, this memory that we are so much more than this vehicle of consciousness. We are so much more than our body. And as a consensus reality, like we talked about, you and I are computers logged into the World Wide Web, adding to the World Wide Web, and downloading from the World Wide Web. So we're co-creating it and also plugged into it. The mystics would have called this the Akashic Records. And since we're a collective species, when enough momentum happens or enough people upload something into the database or the World Wide Web, more people start downloading it, and it becomes like a domino effect almost. So I used to notice, say 20 years ago, I would notice one or two people around me having a spiritual awakening a year. Now it's like, I tell my husband, I'm like, people are popping like popcorn. They're like, pew, 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 pew. It's happening faster and faster. But if people don't understand what that is, it can be terrifying. Sometimes people think they're going insane. Sometimes people think they're bipolar. Sometimes people are having a depression. Sometimes people are just terrified because they just don't know what's happening. And there's actually a lot of logic to it. So let's look at what we're calling a spiritual awakening and what that is. It's this remembering that the world is a lot more than we once thought in the Newtonian paradigm or third dimensional thinking. So if we assume that it's correct that we are multidimensional beings or souls incarnating into a human body, that our awareness is expanding. We're starting to access different spots in our brain than we ever have before. We're perceiving different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're evolving. We're leveling up in the game. And that's making us realize this more multidimensional reality. And a lot of people are starting to feel their connection to source, God, universe, consciousness, pick your metaphor. And as people come online, they have this sort of, sometimes it can be induced by trauma. Sometimes it can be induced by pain. Sometimes it can just spontaneously be induced, just happens. Sometimes it can be induced. Some people do various substances. That's not my favorite method, but it's a valid method. And it's this sort of awakening to, wait a minute, whoa, I'm so much more powerful than I once thought. I am connected to everything. What does that mean? It's sort of like we've been wearing these goggles for our whole lives. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait, what? I can see. And then we start getting very curious about everything. And it's like simultaneously this expansive, amazing evolutionary leap. But at the same time, it's terrifying because it kind of brings up all our fears, brings up all our shame. And it's almost like gaslighting, right? It's like, guess what? Everything you believe about reality is not true. You're in a simulation. You're connected to everybody. Everything is consciousness. And you're like, so it's very triggering to the ego. It destabilizes our root chakra or our sense of stability and safety. So with any big expansion, we have this huge expansion. Wow, whoa, the world is beautiful. Everything is love and light. Oh my gosh. We've been programmed. So they either go into bliss or like anger or like just this, whatever their reaction is to this expansion. And then that's often followed by a contraction. where our old self kind of goes, wait a minute, get back here. This is too much. This is too scary. This is too unfamiliar. And we go slamming back into sort of our old paradigms. People often refer to that as the dark night of the soul. I remember growth, spiritual growth, mental growth, physical growth, and emotional growth are nonlinear. They have expansion, contraction. They have, often growth. Wait, what? I'm out of sticky notes? This is unheard of. My whole life is organized by sticky notes. So remembering that growth often looks like this. Goes up, down, up, down, up, down. But if you follow the trend over time, it's going up. But we experience this, oh my God, everything's amazing. It's beautiful. And then sometimes people go through an anger phase where they're like, we've been screwed. Screw the man. We've been lied to. We've been tricked. And we forget that we're connected to everything and co-creating. And then maybe go into a depression or an up-leveling. I think Brene Brown called hers the spiritual awakening / nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
I haven't read her books, but I definitely intend to, but I have heard that that's what she referred to it as. Eckhart Tolle, I think, had quite a, I haven't read his work either, but that's also on my list. I think he had sort of a more similar one to myself. And some of us were just born remembering some of those things. So when I was born, I was a little bit unplugged from the matrix. Like I didn't really believe the rule set that other people believed. So my whole life, I was sort of gaslighting people, and I used to think people were gaslighting me. I'd be like, they're saying my reality is not true, and all these things like out of body and past life memories, they're saying that's not true. They're invalidating me, which was very painful and lonely. But I also recognize now that to them, it sounded insane, or it sounded very scary, or it sounded very weird. And I was basically telling them that their reality wasn't true. And there's nothing more destabilizing to a human when we're in this human form to our little third dimensional avatars than to have that sort of rug pulled out from under us. So I just see this happening more and more and more on the planet. And it's happening to doctors, lawyers, physicists, people sitting at home, students, younger people, older people. And some of them are embarrassed or afraid, or they don't want to come out of the spiritual closet because they're afraid of being persecuted, they're afraid of being judged, or they don't know what's happening. And if they don't know what's happening and they don't understand it from actually a very logical evolutionary perspective, then it can be really overwhelming and terrifying and lead to a lot of suffering.
What do you think it's happening, or like the spiritual awakening is happening more now compared to before?
Well, I think like we talked about, it's the numbers, it's that tipping point. You get 1, 2, 3% of a population, and then it starts to become a trickle effect. I also think that the internet was a huge evolutionary push for us, because all of a sudden people that were alone, seeing auras or having past life memories or things like that thought they were the only one, can sort of see, wait a minute, what? This happens to other people. And it's also now a lot of people are feeling safe, because never in history has there been a time like this in this set of history that we've had this convergence of religion and old things that the Buddha talked to us about, that from Christ consciousness, from all of these different mystics and mystical and paranormal things, and physics, right? And then the double slit experiment sent us on a whole different wavelength, so to speak. That was a funny physics joke. Into starting to question that reality was much different than we once believed. But it takes a long time it can take generations for us to up level. Like, say, when they discovered, oh my God, the world's not flat, it's round. Not everybody instantly is like, okay, the world's round. Newsflash, memo, okay, got it done. It takes a while. You have your evolutionary curve. So evolution has always happened in curves. That's nothing new, right? So somebody like me would be at the beginning of an evolutionary curve. Not the first, obviously. There's lots of people before me. But statistically, somebody who was born remembering that and had so many different levels of awakening in my life, I was an evolutionary early adopter. And then you have the bulk of the curve. But the more people that end up here, the more it kind of trickles. And the more people that are having those experiences that we're co-creating in the collective, the more people are going to download that. So the more people put something on the internet, yes, if you and I and a lot of people are uploading something to the internet, it's more likely that somebody else who's browsing, who's web browsing, is going to find that thing. Yes.
Yeah.
No different than us putting it in the Akashic or the database or the ether or the simulation, the formula.
Can you talk a bit more on like what's the difference, let's say, between using your metaphor, eating shit sandwich and leveling up, and spiritual awakening, if there is anything?
Well, so you can have one or the other, and they don't necessarily lead to each other. But if people want to really know how to level up fast, and by level up, I mean get really good at the game and the simulation, which is become less fear, more love, or lower entropy, less chaotic, more compassionate, more kind, more connected, less triggered, less unconscious, more conscious awareness, more free will choice, rather than all of that subconscious stuff we talked about in the magnetic masculinity blueprint. One of the fastest ways to do that is to eat your shit sandwiches. And that's just look at the ways that you are showing up in your life that are suboptimal without beating yourself up, without making it mean anything, without blaming everybody else that you have that thing. But it's just about that radical compassion and radical accountability is a formula that is very much can lead to an awakening, or can help people in an awakening align, because just because of all of a sudden we peak at what's on the 10th stair doesn't mean we go from the second stair to the 10th stair immediately. And there's a lot of perfect but suboptimal and can be unnecessary spiritual awakening traps, which I think we're doing in our next episode. We're doing a whole episode about what some of those. Here's the things that are very normal. Lots of them I've done that you don't have to do because other people before you have done them. So you can skip those phases of the game and just get to more results more quickly and more efficiently.
Are there like some ways how men listening can identify that they are going through spiritual awakening, or like are there stages how it happens, or does it happen like suddenly, or like there's a buildup? Like what's the process there?
So again, everybody's unique. So everybody's spiritual awakening can look differently. And some people just have this. Sometimes it can start with this sort of sense of longing or emptiness, or no matter how many boxes they check, no matter how many things they do, no matter how many self-help seminars they achieve, or how many millions of dollars they earn, they still feel like something is missing and they don't know what it is. And that's our heart battery, or our computer and the heart battery should both be attached to that World Wide Web. Otherwise, we're stuck in this sort of lonely bubble, this sort of more self-centered bubble, and that's loneliness. So that can start to drive things. You might start noticing repeating numbers or synchronicities. You know, you might start being like, oh, I see 222 everywhere, or every time I look at the clock, it's 333, or 1111, or you might start getting little synchronicities. You might start just having a desire to consume slightly different types of content. Maybe things that once felt really fulfilling for you, now you do not prefer. So you might be like, I just don't really prefer violent movies anymore. Or you might prefer to go to a meditation class rather than sit at home and drink beer. Or you might, and something that I would say is helpful is to always assume that there's another level that you don't know of yet in the game. Because remember when you were at whatever level you were before, and then all of a sudden you up level and you go, wait, what? Whoa, I have spiritual gifts. I'm intuitive. I have a higher self. The world might be a simulation. Great. Okay. But what a lot of people do is they're like, okay, great. Now I'm done. Now I know. Now that's it. So I just invite people to be curious and always just be curious about like, not like I used to do, which is like, I have to find the next level. I have to find the next level. I have to find the next level. I have to get to the end. I have to get to the end. I have to figure it all out. Not that that wasn't helpful. It's a valid way to have a human experience. There's no wrong way to have a human experience, like we talked about in our incarnation episode. There's not a wrong way. There's just experiences. The system doesn't judge them as good or bad. The ego is what judges them as good or bad. And on some level, we could call them loving choices or fear choices. And of course, loving choices, using our free will for loving choices, is always most helpful for us and others and the system. But sometimes how we learn loving choices and how we learn boundaries and how we learn expansion is by making a bunch of mistakes.
And I also wanted to touch on, you mentioned that it doesn't always feel good, because I feel like a lot of times spiritual awakening is associated with feeling amazing and everything is perfect. But in what you described, it doesn't really seem so. Can you talk a bit through what spiritual awakening feels like or looks like versus what maybe is advertised or you might see out there?
Yeah, definitely. So again, I would invite you that whatever your experience is valid. And I think it can be helpful to understand others, but I don't think that that's helpful to compare our journey to others, because learning is non-linear and we might go in and out of phases. There are kind of generalized stages, but you're not like, okay, I'm done level 1. Now I'm in level 2. Now I'm in level, it might be like in and out. Like we talked about up and down and in and out. We might be like, oh my gosh, I've had all these awakenings in my business and in my personal life. And then we get to our relationship. We're like, oh, and here I'm still in kindergarten. So it can be, you can have feelings of like empowerment and excitement and like, whoa, I am powerful. Or maybe you had an experience. I've had lots of these experiences where all of a sudden you feel your connection to everyone and everything in complete sobriety. And you're like, everything is perfect. I love everything. And that's the love and light phase. But then what can happen again with that expansion is parts of us, if we refer back to our parts work episode at the beginning, is some of our old parts get really activated and they feel unsafe. Remember our episodes about the brain prioritizes what is familiar, right? And then also, like we talked about, that growth of that discomfort of growth. If you're going to build a new bicep muscle, you start lifting weights, it feels really uncomfortable. And that discomfort is a sign of expansion. But if we don't understand that, we either get stuck in I have to pretend everything is love and light because I'm not willing to feel all the other things that I actually have to feel in order to heal and grow and integrate and eat my shit sandwiches, which is how you sustain the level up. So it's almost like we want to show you what's at the 10th stair, but then you kind of have to go back down and earn your way up if you want to stay there. But it gives you a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual lighthouse, maybe, because if you haven't experienced that, you're like, why would I go through all this shit? But if you're like, okay, I kind of know what's there, but if we expect to only stay there and we judge the other experiences like grief, anger, sadness, all the things that might come up that are going to release in order for us to entrain to that new vibration, that new frequency. Those are just buzzwords, but so if we're going to entrain to that new energetic level, then it means a lot of stuff that's at this denser, that's at this second stair, needs to release or evolve or grow. And that can take some time and some discomfort. But again, if you don't have that understanding, then it can feel like I'm failing. It can feel like that got taken away from me. It can feel like the universe is punishing me. It's sort of like your initiation in the game. So you have some big triumphs. You're like, oh, wait, I know where I'm going. I'm heading to the end of that level. But then on that journey, you might have to, I don't know, fight some dragons or jump over some fire pits or whatever it is in order. And maybe not, like we don't want to expect that it's going to be a long, hard journey again. We just want to be curious and understand that whatever it looks like is fine. So sometimes we go up, 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 high, amazing, everything is love and light. And we go slamming back down. And the slamming back down might even be our old normal, might be our old baseline. But now we're comparing it to what we know we prefer. So what used to feel comfortable now feels like being tortured. And people make that mean all kinds of things. And I remind people every day, that means you've grown. That means what used to be that very comfortable sweater you were wearing, now when you put it on, it's itchy, it's too tight, it doesn't fit right. But it's normal that we go back and try it on. And that doesn't mean you're failing. That means you've grown. And that again, you're on that trajectory of growth.
How do you, men listening, how can they distinguish whether the unpleasant side of the spiritual awakening is mental health crisis that might need to address, or whether it's actually spiritual awakening that they're going through?
Well, I think those two can go hand in hand. And I think that it's important to remember that we're multidimensional beings. So a source of, let's say depression or fear or a shutdown state, that could be caused by a spiritual awakening, expansion, contraction. We would call that leveling up. It's like I lifted the weights, I felt really uncomfortable, and now it's going to hurt for a couple of days, and I'm going to wait for it to expand. But I'm going to be really soft and gentle with myself, and eat a little extra healthy and drink a little more water because you want that muscle to grow. A depression could also be a sign that your heart battery is disconnected and that you're not getting your needs met. Depression could also be that you're exposing yourself to lawn chemicals that are inflaming nerves in your brain, or it could be from eating a lot of unhelpful foods, or it could be that you're out of authentic alignment. So I want to be very cautious and remind people that it's not always this or that. I sometimes see people saying, oh, I'm ascending, I'm having up-leveling symptoms. And I'm like, well, you've also been doing a lot of plant medicine, drinking a lot of alcohol, and not sleeping very much. So you might be having your brain overheating, and you might be having not enough glucose in your body, and your liver and your kidneys might be tired. But whatever you're going through, there are some things that are going to help you regardless of which one of them is the symptom and the cause. And that would be to not judge yourself. If you're feeling angry, great, feel angry. Feel angrier than any human being has ever felt. Let that emotion out, then go in and assess why you were feeling that. Sit with the sadness, sit with yourself. And if you have somebody safe in your life that can sit with you, then sit with whatever comes up. Think of it like a little child who's struggling, or a little puppy. You're not like, you're fine, you shouldn't be feeling this way. You're failing. You're never going to get to the top stair. Well, you don't even know how many stairs are. You've only seen the 10th. There's 30 more to go. But so it's just accept. Use a lot of self-compassion and a lot of radical compassion. We can acknowledge, because then sometimes people start realizing, oh my goodness, I have trauma. My parents didn't do this or that for me. And we don't really want to go into the everything is my parents' fault and I'm a victim mode, because that's not a very empowering mode. So we can acknowledge things without attaching to them or making them the focus of our story. So we want to remember the radical compassion, that compassion for ourselves, that we're doing our best, and that we've been really impacted by living in the emotional dark ages, especially men having their emotional navigation system shut down and their heart battery disconnected, and people not knowing what they need, or them not knowing how to ask for what they need, or not even knowing what that is. And compassion for those that impacted them, because they didn't know, right? So instead of looking at it as they failed me, we can look at it as, oh, my parents were here. They gave me everything they could at level 2. Now I've taken it to a level 4. And hopefully my kids will take it to a level 6, because we're evolving. So we can acknowledge the pain that impacted us without going into victimhood, blame, judgment, or any of those emotions that are valid, but not aligned with our true nature of compassion. And it might mean we can feel angry or sad or whatever for a few days or a week or whatever, but not getting stuck there. And then also having compassion for those that we impacted with our unskillful training and our unskillful or unhelpful programming. So just really leaning into compassion wherever we can, even if we have a part of us that's like, I don't feel compassion, I hate everybody, I'm a victim, then have compassion for that part of yourself. Just whatever comes up, love it and have compassion for it and be curious about it and don't suppress it. But also don't, if it's something that's suboptimal, just don't get addicted to it. Don't make it, because the ego can get not that I'm judging the ego. The ego's great. We need an ego, but like anything, we want it on the healthy side. We want it to have healthy food and we want it to be conscious, not unconscious. The ego can, the spiritual awakening is a fun playground for the ego. And it can get a lot of juice there. So we just want to practice that self-compassion, practice that radical compassion, and allow whatever comes up to come up with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment or suppression. And, you can try different things. You can try going to a doctor to make sure that there's nothing medically that needs attention. You can work with a coach. You could try workshops. You could try breath work. You could try eating a lot cleaner. That's something I would always recommend when you're up leveling. And people are like, yeah, I eat healthy. I'm like, no, you probably don't, even if you think you do. We want to start being really cautious, not cautious. We want to start being very excited and empowered. That's more of a loving energy than cautious. That was very fearful energy. We want to start being very loving to what we put in our body, because if we want all of our little particles, if we want to become less particle and more wave, less carbon, more crystalline, less 3D, more 5D, more 4D, we want to up the vibration of our cells and give them more coherence. And it requires a lot of energy for matter to change from one form to another, for energy that was shaped like this to start shaping like this. So we want lots of energy. So we want lots of rest. Self-care is sacred, not selfish. We want lots of rest, as much as we can get. And I know not everybody can have as much rest as they would prefer if they've got companies to run and children to raise and all of those things. But we also want to give our body as many units of energy as we can. And you can refer back to some of our episodes about how to fuel your vehicle of consciousness and how to manage your energy. Eating lots of fruits and vegetables, drinking lots of water, avoiding things that are exhausting to our body. And just treating your body like it's something that you really love, like it's your co-pilot, it's your vehicle. I see a lot of men take very good care of their vehicles. They're out there on Saturday. One of my neighbors is always out there polishing his car, shining it up, covers it, puts it in the garage, puts premium fuel in it, the best of everything. Well, what are you putting in your body? So if you want to up level, if you want to move through some of those more dense phases of the journey more quickly, nourishing yourself mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally is just always a good idea for everybody. And if you haven't had a spiritual awakening yet, well, you're going to, because now you've listened to this. You're on your way. Wherever you are is perfect. It's only the ego or the fear or the shame that's like, I'm not good enough, or I have to be the most spiritually awakened. I have to be the most awakened, or I'm getting left behind, or I'm, judging where we are. How do I know what level I'm at, Sandy? People say that all the time. I'm like, well, I'll tell you what level you're at, but just remember, it's not, we can want to know what level we're at by testing ourselves, like spending a week with our family, or seeing how often you get triggered by other people. If you almost never get triggered or activated, you're probably at a pretty good level. If you always use your words lovingly and you think about everybody, the impact of your actions on everybody in any scenario, and you accept other people where they are and you don't find yourself judging, then you're probably at a pretty good level. But there's probably always something to work on.
I had a follow-up question that I feel like you already started to answer in some ways. With the spiritual awakening and thinking or thinking about man as a multidimensional man, how does spiritual awakening can affect other dimensions like mental, physical, emotional? And is there anything that men can do to navigate that better?
Absolutely. You can follow the magnetic masculinity blueprint because it's going to get there. It's going to get you there. That's why I designed it. That's why I spent 4 years creating it. It's going to get you through those levels, whether you know you're in that or not. And it's going to get you to the point where people want to be, which is authentic, aligned, healthy mind, healthy body, healthy heart, and a healthy relationship with their emotions. There you've arrived. So I could call it a blueprint to enlightenment, or I could call it a how to live your best life, or I could call it how to skip all the crappy phases of the game of the human experience. But just remembering that you are a multidimensional being, and also different areas of your life might evolve at different points. Like I said, you might be really struggling in your personal intimate relationship. That's where we get to do the really deep work. So you might be like stress resilient and trigger proof in every other area of your life, but every once in a while in your personal relationship, some of those old patterns come back, because patterns do come back over time. They come back less frequently. It's like a spiral. They come back less frequently. They come back less intensely, and they don't last as long. But we're here on this planet to learn and grow and improve and have fun. Definitely also to have fun. So it makes sense that we kind of go back and revisit things. Hey, and it's not like testing, I'm going to see how evolved you are. It's more like, hey, are we good here? Should we do a little more fine tuning here? You know, it's like taking, I don't know if you're in a profession that takes CEU credits, like ongoing credits. You know, how am I doing in this area? Let's keep my knowledge updated, or let me see if there's another level of healing that I can do in this pattern that I used to experience frequently. So the magnetic masculinity blueprint will get you there. I know it's a lot. I know we have a lot of information there. But if you listen to it over and over and you practice those things in your life, that's giving you a blueprint or a guideline on how to up-level your mind, your body, your heart, and your emotions, and your authentic alignment, which is naturally going to make you less fear and more love, less self-centered, more empathetic, less particle, more wave. And that's going to help you feel better. Your bucket's going to be full, and you're naturally going to overflow that bucket to others, which is why one of the things we start with is self-compassion. The more compassionate you are to yourself, the more compassionate you're going to be to others. And then you're just behaving more like consciousness at its base source, which is love. Everything is consciousness. Everything is made of consciousness. I am consciousness. You're consciousness. This microphone is made of consciousness. These mushrooms grew from consciousness that I'm drinking with maple syrup and coconut water to nourish my body so that I have lots of energy and I never need caffeine, even with all of the medical conditions I've experienced in my life. So it's fueling ourselves like divine beings and treating ourselves like priceless, precious gifts in every area. Mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, mental.
What did you say is the role of the higher self in spiritual awakening?
Great question. Well, remember that our higher self is already much more evolved. Like people are often like, I have to become more love. I have to become this. I have to become that. You already are that. This is the simulation. This is the game. It's still very important. I know people get like, this is just a game. It is real. This is as real as this is very real. But your higher self is already a lot of those things. And you're just playing this character that you need free will in order to grow and have experiences and feel what it's like to be a creator of consciousness in the physical third dimensional reality. So it's not like, let's get out of 3D because 3D sucks and I want to be more evolved because I'm too good to be 3D. That's just ego. Which is okay. There's nothing wrong with ego. If we have that, then that's very helpful information that we know what we need to work on. But our higher self is there to love us, to guide us without interfering with our free will, because it wants us to make our own experiences. And it's there to support us, and it's there to anchor that baseline that we're trying to kind of get closer to. And it's learning and growing, but it loves you unconditionally. It supports you, and it gives you nudges. But we're often too like stuck in our stuff to notice. You're always getting signs. You're always getting synchronicities. You're always getting opportunities. It just depends what part of that World Wide Web you're tuning into with your thoughts, your physical health of your body, your emotions, your choices, and whether you're acting from fear or love.
And touching slightly on relationships, what did you say to either man's partner who is experiencing them going through spiritual awakening, or men experiencing their partner going through spiritual awakening? Do you have any suggestions or tips if somebody's partner is going through that, or how the partner can help them to navigate it?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't have thought to answer that, but it's a very important question to be answered. I know a lot of couples because I work a lot with couples as well. And so let's look at it from both perspectives, because I think that's helpful. So a lot of men all of a sudden feel left behind if their partner's coming home. And sometimes at the beginning of spiritual awakening can look like, look how many crystal bracelets I'm wearing. I'm going to a sound bath. I'm doing breath work. And I am so bored with your unconscious behavior because I am now, enlightened and you're not, or whatever that looks like. And it can make the men feel very afraid and nervous, and also confused, and also lonely. So it can either be a catalyst for great growth in a relationship, or it can be catalyst for a lot of separation in a relationship, or a divine opportunity to become aware of all of our patterns. So yeah, our partner can feel afraid. They can feel left out. They can feel left behind. They can feel confused. So it's important to just have open discussions and be curious, but skeptical, but open-minded, be accepting, try things out with your partner. If they want to try things, doesn't mean you have to prefer them, because things that seem very normal when you're in a certain level of consciousness seem insane to somebody in another level of consciousness. And the things you're doing right now seem insane to somebody in a much higher than you level of consciousness. I just always assume there's going to be people at much higher levels of consciousness that can teach me things that are going to stretch me. And I assume, and I know that there's a lot of people that are just at the beginnings of those journeys. And it's what it looks like in ego is this. I am 4D or 5D. I'm very woke. And it's so annoying to me to be around all of these unconscious, asleep people. And it's so hard to be me because they are so unevolved and their negative vibes are bumming me out. And that's a valid stage of the journey. I've definitely done that. Okay. But what a different part of that looks like, a different way of viewing that, is if you're in grade 12 and somebody's in grade 4, can you imagine being like, oh my God, you're in grade 4? Do you even understand quantum mechanics? Can you even write an essay? Why on earth are you spending your time building forts with your friends when you could be whatever they're doing? Do you see how absurd that is? Instead, it's more like, hey, you're in grade 4. I was in grade 4 once. In fact, I like to assume that whatever they're doing in grade 4 is way more evolved than what I did in grade 4. I'm like, there's probably 18 people in levels above me looking at me thinking, what a hopeless little kindergartner. So we can keep our ego in check by reminding ourselves that to be an evolutionary leader is a privilege. It's not a superior. And those of us that are at that part of the evolutionary curve, the early evolvers, it's more like, that person's in grade 4. That's great. Grade 4 is really important. And grade 5 is really important, and grade 6 is really important. And if they want from you help on how to get through grade 4 with a little less pain than you did, and you're like, hey, I might like to help you because, you know, I had a lot of pain in that phase, but here's some tips I learned going through that level. And see if that helps you. But either way, you're great the way you are, you know, and showing them love and compassion. This separation and this polarity of like, I'm awake and you're asleep, and I am this and you are that, is just a symptom of more fear, more shame, that separation, that dualistic thinking. So I think, yeah, and I think it's fair to assume that all of us have done obnoxious things, and all of us are in whatever level we're in, and there's always another level. There's always another level. You're never like, I've arrived, now I'm done. And even when you do get to some of those levels, of which I always assume there's more, I can tell you firsthand, as somebody who prioritized my growth for 10 years frantically, when you truly, I mean, feel your connection to everyone and everything, and you see everybody as a part of yourself, and everybody's success is your success, and you're rooting for everyone, all of a sudden, being here actually has its own flavor of loneliness. And you're not like, haha, I'm done and you're not, I'm better than you. It's more like, oh, every narcissist, every bully, everybody is a part of me. And this feels so good that I want this for everybody, not in a you need to change so that I'm okay kind of way, although it's valid to go through that phase. But it's more like, you know, how can I love and accept you where you are without allowing you to impact me negatively? But how can I just understand that you're learning your lessons? You're playing the game the way you need to play it. And if you want help, I can give you compassion, and I might be able to give you some hints, but it shouldn't look like, hurry, I need everybody to evolve because, you know, their shittiness is bumming me out. That's a very common, very normal phase, but I think it's at some point it's helpful to shift into more love and compassion and less like. So then let's look at it from the other point of view, okay? To get back to your question, I always go on these little rabbit holes. So now let's look at, you're the one who's having a spiritual awakening and your partner has not yet. So I have 4 men in that position. And some of them feel like they're outgrowing their partner. Some of them feel really lonely because now nobody can meet them where they're at. And some of them get really annoyed with their partner, like we just talked about in my last little rabbit hole, because they're like, ugh, my partner is so unconscious. My partner is so behind, which isn't very, when we get frustrated where somebody is, it's valid, because I've also experienced that loneliness of like separation my whole life. Like I was talking about this stuff when I was a toddler. So believe me, I understand the loneliness. We didn't even have the internet yet then. I literally just thought that I made it all up. So I understand that existential loneliness. But I also know that whenever in my life I've tried to rush people, or you have to grow, you have to evolve for me to be okay, energetically, it's sort of like telling them, you're not good enough yet. You're not good enough yet. You're not good enough yet. And is that an energy that's going to help them grow and experience into love? Or is that going to push them back into more fear? So a lot of people with good intentions are running around telling people like, well, everything you believe about your reality, and I've done it, everything you believe about your reality isn't true. Guess what? You're a multidimensional being who's growing, and and this is a simulation, and you know, I don't know, whatever things. And if that person needs a little time to digest that, give them that grace, because it can be terrifying for them. And the more we make them feel not good enough, and the more we make them terrified, the more we're actually preventing their awakening, right? The more we're keeping them stuck with good intentions, but it's just not helpful. So I can see challenges of being in both of those positions. The one whose partner's had an awakening and they feel a little bit weirded out, a little bit lonely, a little bit confused. And also the one who's had the awakening and their partner is still behind and their partner is confused and their partner is scared. And just remember that at the end of the day, what we all want and need, it's the ego that wants to get to the next level, and the next level, and the next level, and be better than, and win, and be finished, and be gone with this human experience. Once you're really good at playing this game, you're like, oh, I really like it here. And once you really know that people are all a part of you, you'll have more compassion. And that might mean compassion for the part of yourself that's like, hurry up. I definitely have that part. I'm like, let's go. You guys are suffering so much unnecessarily. It's ridiculous. And we could all be having more fun together if you just listen to me. So that's why I created this podcast, or why we created this podcast. So, but again, it's the energy behind that action, and just really leaning into that compassion for ourselves, compassion for our partner, and remembering to come back to connection and making it okay if one person's in grade 6 and one person's in grade 2. And if you were in grade 2, how would you want somebody in grade 6 to treat you? And if you're in grade 6, how would you treat somebody in grade 2?
With the follow question here with, let's say, assuming that both partners are into growth or kind of leveling up,
Yeah,
they might be more familiar with that concept. How can they navigate different kind of spurts of one growing, the other growing, and kind of like navigating that dynamic of one outgrowing the other? Then, and it also probably is in different areas as well.
yeah.
Do you have any suggestions or like tips on how to navigate that?
Well, when we look at our wants, needs, let's bring it back to our wants, needs, boundaries, and values. So I'm somebody who values growth, and it's not from a place of I'm not good enough yet, used to be, or I need to get out of this game because it's so painful. That's valid. I used to be. But from a place more of like, I like this game. It's fun. I'm amazing. I'm so proud of how far I've come. I wonder what's next, because I assume there's lots of things that I don't know yet. And let me go, and you fall in love with growth. If I had a partner who did not have a value or a preference for growth, our relationship would be impossible and excruciating and incompatible. Yes. So my partner and I both love growth. And there's areas where he's in grade 8 and I'm in grade 4. And I'm like, oh, that's so great. That is so great, because you spent 10 years getting to that level in that area. Now you can help me get there in a matter of months, because you've already done all that work. So there's ways that my partner's like way past me and knows things that I'm like, how does he even know that? That's amazing. But I look at it, I don't have a lot of ego. So I look at it as like, oh my God, this is how I can level up. But imagine being in a relationship with me and being like, oh, here's how you can level that up. Oh, here's how you can level that up. Oh, here's how you can level that up. If somebody didn't love growth, it would be traumatizing to be in a relationship with me, probably, because I love it. And I'm always like, how can I? And I can help somebody up level in those areas very quickly, because I have this blueprint. I know, I'm like, oh, I fell in that trap. Oh, I got that dragon bit my head off 5 times before I learned. Now you don't have to. And I'm like, oh, if somebody really wants growth, I can sit down with them for 3 months or work like in depth with them for a year and help them evolve more than many people do in 5 lifetimes. Because I'm like, I'll tell you what every one of your shit sandwiches are with love. I don't mind. It's just like when somebody feeds me a shit sandwich, I'm like, oh, that's so exciting. Hey, Sandy, I think sometimes you're passive aggressive. Well, that makes sense, because I experienced a lot of passive aggressiveness in childhood. So why am I doing that? That's very interesting. Okay, good. Great. Now I just got to level up. So if both of them are in love with growth, I think it's wonderful if they can accept the different levels that each other are in, expect that sometimes you're both going to be in expansion. And that is so fun. And sometimes one of you is going to be in bliss and one of you is going to be in dark night of the soul. That's a different flavor. And that takes some very conscious relationship skills to navigate. because the person who's down here can feel like left behind and almost resentful of the person up here. And the person up here can be like, come on, just join me up here, or be resistant to the person here. And just remember that it's always going to do a bit of this and a bit of that. And that's okay. And you can learn from each other in different areas. And that's actually just how you keep getting better at the game and you keep leveling up. So when you get that ego and pride out of the way a little bit in a loving way, we don't want to judge our ego or pride. It's just help. It's remember, this is an information-based virtual reality. Everything is information. Even if you get triggered or your ego gets pissed off by me saying that, that's great. That's information. It's only when we judge those things as not good enough that they become a hindrance rather than a portal or a button to up level in the game. And once you, again, I use that word cautiously. And I could recommend a lot of readings to help you understand the science of this, because it is actually very logical. And it's really the only model that explains everything physical matter reality and everything non-physical matter reality. But it's a game. And once you know you're in a game, the game changes a lot. So part of the awakening is, oh my God, wait, that changes a lot. And then you get the opportunity to learn to get really good at the game. And once you know you're in a game and you get really good at playing it, that's when you're making quantum leaps and stuff gets really, really fun. But it doesn't mean that you're never going to have contrast, because that's where the growth is. So I still get contrast in my life. It's just, well, sometimes I mind. Sometimes my ego gets pissed off and I'm like, I miss bliss. I want to only be in bliss state forever. And I'm like, I know. And my wiser self is like, I know, that's hard, but we can't always be in bliss state, can we? My ego's like, what do you want to be? It's like, well, then don't get married or go out in the world and just live in bliss and ignore all your shit that you need to work on. Okay. So yeah.
Anything you want to add to the topic on spiritual awakening?
Wherever you are right now is perfect. You're never going to be left behind. And just treat yourself and others with compassion. And follow the magnetic masculinity blueprint. I know there's a lot of information and it can challenge and it can trigger, and all of it's perfect. And it's not the best model. It's not the only model. There's a billion other people that have similar models. It's just one way that I've created that. And if it doesn't resonate for you, keep trying. You'll find one that does, and that's perfect. And wherever you are is perfect, and you're not behind. You're always evolving. Consciousness isn't, okay, that's not true. I was going to lie. I was going to say you can never de-evolve. You actually can de-evolve, but that's okay. That's expansion, contraction. But at the end of the day, in some form, there's always ever going to be grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, and that's expansion. So you are growing, but sometimes those phases have that up and down, expansion, contraction, and that's normal. That's totally normal. So that's okay. And yeah.
And if you have any questions, which you might have, there's always a link in show notes where you can submit those, or you can comment them in comments if you're watching on YouTube. And
yeah, please do.
And
or book there's always a link too that you can book a full life diagnostics strategy session with me. And yeah, that's a really good place to start having sort of a more personalized blueprint that can help you completely up level in all areas of your life so that you can experience your most magnetic life in the shortest amount of time possible.
Yeah. I highly suggest doing it. Especially, I was even thinking about it when you're talking about the relationships, because that's another thing that can be beneficial in navigating those relationship, spiritual awakenings within the relationship. All right.
Yes, relationships are a magical place to know exactly and specifically what you need to work on.
Yeah.
Which is why they're the most painful sometimes experiences, or maybe you're crushing that part of life, but you're terrible at business or terrible at money or terrible with your health. Maybe you've got an amazing relationship and you've got millions and millions of dollars and a successful career, but your health is terrible. That's fine. We've all got different areas to work on. Some people are born with, like a lot of my clients are born, especially the men I work with in tech and these thought leaders, game changers, CEOs, PhDs, millionaires, they are born with a lot of development in their mind. They're very smart. So then they've not had to spend as much time developing that. It was already developed. You've got that. You're crushing that. Great. Good. Lean into that. But maybe what you haven't focused a lot on is the things that you weren't born crushing. You know, I was born with a very high emotional intelligence. So and I'm still developing my emotional intelligence. But it's just, again, it's looking at the different areas of our life and looking at them from a state of optimization and understanding that we're always growing and expanding. So that can either be really painful, and it can happen by experiencing our old patterns over and over and over again or we can start really enjoying growth and enjoying playing the game and learning to level up. And that's why I can't tell people enough. I'm like, if you learn to love eating a shit sandwich, your journey from fear to love, or your journey from high entropy to low entropy, or your journey from disconnected to connected is going to be really quick.
Yeah. So book a call with Sandy. You will thank us later.
That's true.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye.